Folks, it's back. That strange, bad smell that, whilst getting right up your snout, is also reassuringly familiar. It's a wet dog or rotting fruit. You know it when you smell it, but it doesn't half pong. And we have it again today. You thought you'd fumigated the place, and there were a few days of blessed relief, but you opened the door after coming back home from work and bang, there it is. The smell again. And it's the smell of Tory infighting. Here's Suella Braverman speaking in Washington, giving a sense of the direction she would wish to take the Conservative Party were she to become leader of it. During a rambling tirade against much of the world, Suella Braverman takes specific aim at the pride flag, a flag that flew above her Home Office department and which, she suggests, is representative of a horrible political campaign.
Far, far too many Tory politicians agreed, and still agree, that the progress flag must be flown. To be kind, to be inclusive. It shows how liberal and progressive we are. And that's what many Conservatives want us to be. Well, the progress flag says to me one monstrous thing, that I was a member of a government that presided over the mutilation of our children in our hospitals and from our schools.
Too many liberal Conservatives, she said. The party failed to stop the lunatic woke virus, her words, and had been dumped out of office after a failure to keep its promises. She says, "Our problem is that the liberal Conservatives who trashed the Tory party think it was everyone's fault but their own. My party governed as Liberals, and we were defeated as Liberals. But seemingly," she says, "as ever, it is the capital C Conservatives who are to blame." I guess the argument being that had the Tories governed like true Conservatives, for whom she is apparently the self-declared standard bearer, they would have won, or at least perhaps been defeated slightly less catastrophically. Forgetting the Brexit referendum, forgetting the Rwanda plan, forgetting the Liz Truss economic experiment, what of the Conservative right was there left for the Tories in government to explore or to try? From Washington to Westminster, and where the Simpsons had the Bimon Sci-Fi Con, we have the NatCon Conf of Conservatives on the right who have been gathering to give their assessment of where it went wrong for the Tories and how to rebuild the party and with whom at their helm. LBC reporter Henry Riley has spent a joyous afternoon down there. Henry, what have they been telling each other?
Well, Tom, good afternoon. Popular conservatism, just one of many factions within the Conservative Party at the moment. It's been going since February, and today launched a conference called Beginning the Rebuild. Now, the list of speakers included historians, lords, current and former MPs, as well as former MEPs, members of the European Parliament. Lord Hannan was one of those, and started the first of what was to be many Doctor Who references.
We've been around for 3.5 centuries. And we've survived that long because, like Doctor Who, we can endlessly regenerate according to the needs of that moment. There is no reason why we shouldn't regenerate now, provided that, unlike Doctor Who, we don't go woke and forget what made us popular in the first place. And that, it seems to me, is our task, and that is why we are all gathered here today.
Suella Braverman was beamed down from Washington and thanked members for the warm reception, even though that the message was pre-recorded. She said that it was hard to tell Labour and Sunak's Tories apart. She accused Conservative Central Office of treating the Tory grassroots badly and said it was time to stop smearing Nigel Farage's voters.
Historically, in British politics, we have had the monopoly on the right-wing vote. That's one of the reasons why we've been so successful politically. The left, by contrast, for the last 100 years, has been split. Left-wing voters have had a choice of party to go for. And we, by contrast, have had the luxury of a monopoly, but no longer. And that is why the Reform Party presents an existential threat to us electorally.
Now, also present and speaking along the same vein was the former Cabinet Minister Sir Jacob Rees-Mogg, who said that Reform UK, Nigel Farage's party, were all part of the same Conservative family.
And even for our failings, even for the inability to deliver what we believed in, 7 million people still voted Conservative, and the broader Conservative family won 11 million votes. So that's not too bad. And yes, I include Reform as the broader Conservative family. And sometimes families have their differences. But we need to reunite that Tory family and recognise that conservatism is more popular than the Conservative and Unionist Party.
Now, the event was actually held at an evangelical church. This was very much Conservative officials preaching to the choir. It was attended by over 100 members, councillors, officials who gathered to discuss the future of conservatism. And I managed to catch some party members on the way out who told me what the future was.
I think Suella Braverman is right that the right has to unite. Otherwise, if it's splintered, that we will always have a party of the centre-left in charge.
I think the results of the election, it sort of speaks for itself. Clearly, there is the appetite for a true Conservative party.
With the pressure of Reform getting about 4 million votes or so, really, I think the Conservative Party really has to shift its position to the right.
Lastly, Tom, there were two main takeaways from the event. Firstly, they're asking MPs, Conservative MPs, not to oppose everything Labour do just for opposing sake, so house building and growth, and also making sure that members have a big say on who the next leader is, and they're asking for Rishi Sunak to stay in place until well after the Conservative Party conference.
Henry, I wonder in what way there was any sense of hope about what it was that they were defining as the problem and how they can resolve it. Did you get any sense from any of the speakers that they thought they could turn this around in one parliamentary term?
No, certainly not in one parliamentary term. I mean, the first speaker they brought out was Dr. David Starkey, the controversial historian, who basically said that all Conservative MPs were useless and that many of them don't know how to read. So I don't think that landed particularly well at the start. And it got gradually better from that point, Tom. But
I think that sounds really good already, to be honest.
And a lot of it, Tom, was just attacking Conservative central office. CCHQ was called at one point corrupt by a former MEP. So no, really, no real sort of strands of hope.
Can I ask you a question that Karen's put forward, Henry? So Karen's on WhatsApp says, Henry, what was the weirdest/funniest bit?
Oh, it's going to be a long night if I go into that. I think the best moment, I referenced it then, was Suella Braverman did a pre-recorded message. They made a big play to say, look, Suella Braverman's very busy. She's done this pre-recorded message from Washington. But then she started her pre-recorded message by saying, conference, thank you so much for the warm reception. Well, how could she have known? It was pre-recorded.
Playing with the boundary of reality. Henry, thank you very much indeed. Henry Riley, LBC reporter, who was at the Popular Conservatism event this morning. The threat from Reform from the Tory right is clearly very real. We saw that borne out in votes on Thursday, Friday, didn't we? 4 million votes for Reform. So if Jacob Rees-Mogg is there talking about the broader Conservative family, the family is a bit split at the moment because a lot of the people who you might have thought had previously been in the Conservative tent have now gone over to another tent where it seems a lot more fun and they're talking a game that they like. When it comes to reducing immigration, the Conservative Party catastrophically failed. When it came to reducing taxes, ultimately, not entirely their fault, but ultimately the Conservative Party failed. When it came to Brexit, particularly for those people who voted for it, even Nigel Farage said Brexit has failed. But you wonder what would be left for a Conservative Party under a right-wing Conservative voice like Suella Braverman to experiment with. What would be left to do, given that you're not trusted on immigration, you're not going to be trusted on tax for years to come. The Brexit thing you've trialled and always opposed whatever the actual formal position, the written down position was. You'd always argued that the world could be different, even though when the different world was presented with you didn't like it either. The Liz Truss economic experiment, the going for growth and tax, that happened and burned on contact with reality. And actually, interestingly, the supply side reform that Liz Truss talked about and actually was right about when it came to planning and when it came to various bits of supply side reform, Labour's doing. Labour's sort of owning that. We talked about it yesterday with some of the ways in which they want to change the planning system. Similarly, Labour can own getting down immigration. They can see that as something that voters put them into office to do, and they can see that as something that they can do based on upping the skills of British people or whatever. It's not just, I guess the point is, it's not just an issue on the right getting immigration down now. 0345 6060 973. There are the Conservative Party, or elements of it, ripping each other a new one on which direction to go in. Do you think it makes electoral sense? Let's start with the numbers first, because a lot of politics is numbers. In order to regain 4 million votes from reform types, most of which will have sort of bled over from Conservative voters to reform voters, does it mean that Conservative Party has to head to the right, has to go further to the right than it previously was with someone like Suella Braverman or Jacob or whoever? That it has to go that way? Forgetting, of course, I think a salient tale from Oxfordshire. In Oxfordshire, there are now no Conservative MPs. That hasn't happened since... There are seats in Oxfordshire that have been Conservative since about 1777. Where have those votes gone? They've gone to the Lib Dems. Either that is Conservative voters in that part of the world saying, we don't want you in office anymore, we're prepared to vote for anyone to get you out. Tactically, it makes sense for us to vote Lib Dems, so we're voting for them, but we might come back to you at some stage. Or it's a group of now ex-Conservative voters saying, we do not like the direction of travel you've taken the party in, we need something slightly more small L liberal. There is a huge decision here for the Conservatives to have to make in opposition. Do they tack more to the right, in which case I don't see Oxfordshire going back to the Conservatives anytime soon, or those seats, 70 odd, many of them lost the Conservative vote, went over to the Lib Dems. I don't see them being retained by a party that talks like Suella Braverman is talking like. Do you? Because that has got to be part of the consideration too for the Conservatives. Not just the 4 million reform votes, but those voters who went over to the Liberal Democrats. Now, either they went over to give the Tories a kicking, but they might be back in the future. What they might be back to, don't know. And if the Conservatives go to the right, those votes are gone. That they're lost. And I just wonder whether this might be the moment of the Conservative Party splitting. How can you have a political party that seeks to have in its tent some of the 4 million people who voted for reform and some of the people in places like Oxfordshire who voted for the Lib Dems? How can you marry those two groups up? Not just on the numbers, but on what they think, what they believe.